Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for taking time from at the end of a long day to listen to somebody who's far away. I would like to take this opportunity to talk about what for us is sort of a detour. As you are familiar, Google Scholar's primary focus over the years has been to make it possible for everyone to find articles that they're looking for. Looking at journals, looking at metrics is to some extent a detour from that. We do that because it provides a significant advantage in terms of being able to figure out which articles are of interest to people. I will present today the design of our journal metric, which is H5-Index, as you're probably familiar with, why we did it, how we did it, what are the features, and what we see as advantages. Let's take a step back to the time. 1990 is just an arbitrary date that I picked. Go back to the time when the journal metrics that are popularly used. What was the situation then? What were the metrics designed to measure? For what purpose? Recall that at that point, print was a dominant format. As your library, what your shelves could hold was what you could read. As an author, what your library had was what you read. What that meant was that libraries needed to maximize their return on investment. There are two investments there at that point. The money that you pay for subscriptions and the shelf space, the scarce shelf space that you're using to store these articles. Every article in the collection had to be physically stored, took up shelf space. So the key part of the metric that is designed, impact factor, which everybody is familiar with, is essentially estimating the utility for this scarce resource. Effectively, it's designed to say, here's the number of citations per article. But if you look at it from the point of view of library acquisitions, or in terms of what decisions it runs, it's effectively the average number of citations per inch. Looking at the challenges of distribution and storing the journals, the distribution channels ended up being bimodal. There were a small number of journals in each field that were deemed to be high utility for the amount of space that they were taking. These journals were widely subscribed to. They had huge audiences, or at least much larger compared to other journals not considered core. And what that meant was authors took the wide distribution as a significant component in their decisions of where to publish. Because in the end, from an author, a paper that very few people read makes it hard for them to build a reputation based on that paper. And the final set is, in addition to libraries and authors, are the people who are looking to evaluate the impact of the author's work. And they utilize the same measure that is designed originally for figuring out what the right subscriptions are to look at what the potential impact is. Tenure committees ended up counting articles in core journals. Flash forward 25 years. Today, almost all journals are online. Shelf space is no longer a constraint. You don't need to measure citations per unit space or a unit number of things. Every article is no longer physically stored. The space is not a constraint. Secondly, all journals reach everybody equally. If you are online, you can get to a journal. Some may take a little bit longer to find, but the extreme constraint that the physical distribution used to impose on the size of a collection for our library is no longer present. What that means is that audience size is no longer a useful input in terms of deciding where to submit. There are still issues in terms of figuring out where to submit, but it's not audience size anymore. And for tenure committees, you no longer need to depend on this core journal determination to figure out whether the author's work has had impact or how the author's work is regarded by his or her peers. The second class of changes that has happened over time is that search services have moved to relevance ranking. Prior to this, search services were mostly time-based ranking. Most people would either search and then effectively browse across the time-based ranking or browse tables of content. Presence of articles that were not relevant hindered you. So it did matter if they were articles that you did not want. Today, this is no longer relevant. Readers search for and read articles and only look at articles that are relevant to them. The presence of other articles has no impact on readership. For libraries, success is subscriptions being used. And to some extent, approximation, journals with more well-known papers are more likely to be used. So those are the journals you care about. The fact that those journals may have other articles, the ones that may not be read by the, doesn't actually change all that much in terms of how useful that subscription to that journal is. Looking at the other side of the aisle, for authors, success has always been reputation in my community. So what do I want from a metric when all journals have equal audience sizes and the size of a journal is no longer significant? So what I want to know is, what are the examples of success? What successful community am I going to join if I publish in this journal? Publication decisions are always aspirational. I'm an author, I've been a faculty member. For most of your papers, you hope it's going to be successful. You hope people are going to say, wow. No one shoots for the average paper. So what should today's journal metric look like in the world that we live in at this point? When journals are all online and all journals have equal audience sizes. Given what the ideal approach then, since size is no longer a constraint, since shelf space is no longer a constraint, is to focus on the successful papers. These are the papers that matter. These are the papers that shift a field. These are the papers that change how your peers will do research tomorrow. For authors, it translates into how big is the successful community in this journal. How many successful papers, who are the authors, and so on. For libraries, how many papers in this journal are likely to be widely read? That brings us to H-Index. As you're familiar, H-Index focuses on the upper end of the citation distribution. A journal with an H-index of the image is from Wikipedia. It shows basically what H-index corresponds to. Here, the articles that you're focusing on are in the left top box. Journals with an H-index of 50 has at least 50 papers with 50 citations. Those are the papers that you're focusing on. The fact that the journal may have another 300 papers with lower citations is not a significant factor in the metric. Then looking at H-index for a journal, you want to pick something that reflects the recent impact of the journal, not historical impact of the journal. So we picked a 5-year time period. We picked 5 years sort of as a compromise to cover citation rates of as many fields as possible. There's huge variance in citation rates across fields. Humanities and social sciences are significantly slower than STM, humanities even more than social sciences. Experimental fields are definitely slower than theoretical. It takes longer to put together the techniques, the methods, the equipment, the apparatus, and then do the experiments. And then there are some fields like my own that are centered around biannual conferences. A 5-year time period allows you to cover all of these. A second metric that we have looked at is H5 median. H-index by design counts the number of papers, counts the number of papers about what the successful threshold in the metric is. It ignores the distribution of citations and such, which in some occasionally or in some cases can be a potential issue. Two journals with the same H-index may have articles with much higher number of citations in their H score. H-median tries to bring back a measure of this distribution. It's the median of citation count for all articles in the journal's H score. And we use it to break ties between journals with the same H5 index. So that's the metric. That's the measure that you use. And then there's, of course, all the other details of how you build a set of metrics around this measure. In Scholarmetrics, we include 3 different classes of publication venues. Journal articles, of course. We include journal articles from websites that follow these indexing guidelines. The requirement of indexing guidelines is to ensure that the journal is well indexed. If the journal is partially indexed, the metric is going to be off anyways, and it's not clear what the utility of such a metric is. We also include selected conferences in computer science and EE. In these fields, conferences are the primary publication venues. Give you my own example. I think I probably have 1 journal article in my entire research career, which was admittedly not huge, but at least 12 years. And finally, we include preprint collections from arXiv and NBR. These are the first points of publications for many, many articles in these fields. And for some of the articles in the field, these are the final publication venues. So the question is, when an author is looking at where to publish, these are the different kinds of or not just publish, where to make their article available for their peers to read, how to communicate their article. These are the 3 broad classes that he or she would be considering. The second set of criterion, journals or the publication venue should have had at least 100 articles in 5 years. To be considered a serial, it needs to have continued presence, a sufficient period of existence for it to say this is a collection that you can measure. And you need to draw the line somewhere. It could be 75, it could be 100, it could be 125. Currently, we have picked 100 as the boundary. It covers most journals, almost all actually. It must have at least one citation considering all articles. If it doesn't have even one citation, then it's not clear what the metric would be. The citations in the statistics includes the statistics include citations from all index articles, not just the journals included in Cybermetrics. So journals, books, preprints, everything. From coverage, as far as we understand, Cybermetrics covers more publication venues than other metrics. They include journals in all major languages. Articles that appear in multiple journals are included for both. So this is common for computer science. Many people publish in conferences, and then some of them publish their articles in journals as well. The article count both for the journal and for the conference. Similarly, for published preprints that are later published, they accounted for both the preprint collection and the journal where they're finally published. Cybermetrics presentation is by category and by language. By category is for English journals only, and by language elsewhere. The journals and conferences are presented in the order of H5-Index, with H5 median being used as the secondary ordering measure. For each journal, we present the list of articles that make up that H-index, that are the witnesses, saying here is the list of articles that the H-index comprises of. Not just in terms of transparency, it provides another very significant value. It allows potential authors to view the community of successful papers. What is the group that I'm going to join if I publish? If I'm able to publish in this particular journal. In the end, reputation often is the group that you belong to. For English publications, we present the journals and conferences by category. You can browse by 8 broad and roughly about 250 specific categories. A journal can appear in multiple categories. It's not required, it's not a strict partition. This allows us to handle multidisciplinary journals as well as categories that have blurred boundaries. The categorization is automated. First step, there's a per article categorization. And then the second step clusters the categories found in all the articles in a journal and picks the dominant categories. So in some sense, the category for a journal is the category of most of the articles, rather than a list of all the categories that the journal may publish in. For non-English publications, the presentation is far sparser, and this is a challenge for us. We currently present language-based lists for 11 non-English languages. These are the languages with the largest number of journals. I'm full aware that a browse list based on language isn't directly as useful as a category-based language. The challenge here for us is that automated categorization is harder when you have only much fewer number of journals per category. To be able to build an automated categorization, you need to be able to find other ways, different ways than we have used in the past. It's a challenge that we are looking to address, but haven't yet been able to. And then what for the journals that are not listed in the browse category? Each category browse or The language browse includes either top 20 or the top 100 journals. Many, many more art journals. Basically, everything that's included in the Cybermetrics collection can be searched by using keywords. The question that I get many times is, why don't you have more? Long browse lists are really hard to navigate. And the ability, we rank, in some sense, ranking something that is like 200 or between 200 and 201, the differences aren't all that significant. The significant point there is what is the group of successful papers and what is the group of authors, the community that I will be showing. I'll takeaway and advantages of H5-Index as a metric. The first thing that I come to is the resistance to noise. A noisy space. Noise is both inherent in the overall structure of the space because of the highly skewed distributions. So present, when you try to index a diverse collection of journals which have different levels of fidelity, different levels of accuracy, different conventions of how citations are specified, how things are put together. So the first part basically is the issues in terms of skew. One or two papers do not create a successful community. If your goal is to let the authors see what successful community you're joining, you want to count the number of successful papers, then try to estimate an average. And the approach of counting allows you to move beyond the skew. The approach of counting also stabilizes the measures. If there are some errors occasionally here and there, which will occur because of the different levels of processing as well as different levels of ability at each of the sources. The second advantage is that it avoids sensitivity due to article classifications. You don't need to worry about which are the citable articles. You just include all articles. Most of the time, the articles that are currently considered not citable aren't cited. But you don't need to make that decision. It just automatically falls out from the design of the metric. And if you later change the classification, it has no impact on the measure. If it turns out, as occasionally has happened in the past, that a letter to editor or a short communication becomes widely cited, it automatically gets taken into account for the metric. H-Index allows a quick pickup. The new journals have often been included in about a year after they have started. If you to recall, the inclusion criteria requires that the serial include 100 articles, which isn't a large number as long as the journal is able to get a reasonable number of articles. And these are the journals that need more visibility. Well-established journals everybody knows about. Nobody needs to be told by a metric that the dominant journal in their field is a good one to publish. Everybody knows those. The utility of metrics is for journals that are not familiar with. And of course, for my own field, conferences have way more churn. New conferences come up all the time. Being able to see the papers in a new conference are done soon after the conference has been started makes it easier for authors to decide whether the new conference is a good field for them. This is, in some sense, not a major advantage that we had started out thinking based on, but over years we have found has a fairly useful feature of H5-Index. Citation counts will vary year by year because they depend on the specific set of papers that are included. Approaches that will count citations will bounce. You do an average, you do a median, you're going to bounce. Counting papers will tolerate a fair bit of variation. If today your most cited paper had 1,000 citations and next year it had 800, it doesn't change your measure. The number of successful papers remains successful. The notion is not whether the specific number is 800 or 820, but rather that whether both papers have been successful, have had wide impact on how people see that field. Averaging based metrics are also sensitive to number of papers. Many journals have variation in publication rates over time. In which papers are included. H-Index focusing on successful papers as H-Index does, tolerates this change, is able to be stable in the presence of such changes. And of course, H-Index is almost trivial to follow. There's no complex determination of citable articles. You don't need to know whether which articles are to be counted and which articles are not. All articles are included. And the computation is simple counting of citing articles. There is no transitive computation. Transitive computation can be hard to follow. I used to run Google's web search, and one of the components of that was computing PageRank, which is a transitive computation. And occasionally when things didn't go right, it took a lot of effort to figure out where the transitive computation, where the communication, the passing of the value was going off from. For an H-Index, you see the list of articles, you see the list of articles citing, you see the articles that stand witness to the computation. You can see for yourself. You could actually compute it yourself. You don't actually need me. A concern that comes up in H-Index is, do larger venues do better? Since you are focusing on successful papers, and you are no longer taking the size of the venue into account, do larger venues automatically do better? And the answer is no. You can add a large number of low-cited papers to an existing venue, and it would make no change to the H-Index. If you add papers that are cited just as much as they are today, that doesn't change the H-Index. To change the H-Index, you need to increase the number of highly cited papers, and you need to increase the number of citations across all of them. Successful papers usually impact the directions of their field. Journals that have many such papers essentially have a large impact, no matter how they collect those papers. To summarize, in a world where all journals are online, where the audience size, all journals have equal audience size, and readers search using relevance ranking, where what you care about the papers and the presence of papers that are not relevant to them doesn't get in their way. What you really want to focus on are the successful papers. The focus on successful papers fits what an author is looking for to be a successful author, to write a successful paper, as well as drive usage. Successful papers are the ones people read more often. As a journal metric, H5-Index has several advantages. It's resistant to noise, is tolerant to input variations, is easy to follow and compute, and usually picks up relatively quickly. Thank you very much. I'm open to questions. Oh, sorry, I don't have to type. Okay, all right. Yes, it's possible. The question is that relevant? Most journals are going to publish articles in the same field. It's expected that they would cite articles in the same journal. The issue with self-citations is one of abuse, where people self-cite way more than would be expected or normal based on publication. That's an issue that can be dealt with directly rather than trying to focus on what is a completely natural activity. What would you consider a reasonable limit? That's very small. It gets hard to identify when something is actually the same repeated serial. The issues, if you think about it, 100 per 5 years is 20 per year, which is 5 articles in a quarterly publication. That's roughly how we come up with 100. The least frequent publication, the lowest frequency of publication in most journals is quarterly. 5 articles per issue in a quarterly journal. That's how you get up with 100%. So what is the expected model? Is it an annual journal? How do you come up with 10 articles in a year? What is the publication mechanism that allows you to arrive at 10 articles per year? I'm not arguing this thing, I'm trying to figure out how to design this. I need to make sure that I'm picking up journals and I'm not picking up something else. So it needs to have sufficient frequency. And we designed this based on looking at, what is the expected kinds of distributions. Now, whether it's 100 is right or 75 is right, I don't know. No, I understand. There is definitely variation there. There's no question. That is why we go to 5-year time period, and that's why we move down to 100. 100 is actually a fairly small number if you go by journal. Let me turn around and say, what is the publication frequency? Is it once a year, one issue with 10 papers? How do you end up with 10 papers per year? Now you pick the top set. You have to pick some top number. It's 20, it could be 30, it could be 40. Beyond that point, the differences between the 50 and the 51st is not significant. I mean, realistically, I mean, you can compute numbers to arbitrary precision. They don't make them any more accurate. The numbers can all be seen. The point is, at least from the way I'm looking at, there is clearly for every discipline, the venues that everybody considers as successful, these are the ones that have the widest impact. Whether what that number should be 20, it should be 30, it should be some number or some threshold, 40, whatever the number be. But beyond that, is basically the positioning is not actually significant. Yeah, beyond that, the positioning isn't actually significant. Beyond that, you look at, on a journal by journal basis, should I publish in this journal? Is this journal for me as an author? What community am I joining? What are the successful papers? It's not a matter of being able to say, this number 36 is better than that, or this number 12 is better than that number 11. It's going to be, what are people going to think of me, or which sort of papers will I be joining? That precision isn't actually significant. I can say 3.95566, but it doesn't actually mean much. 20 is not a magic number. We picked a number 20 because it's a reasonable length to browse. from a UI point of view, and 10 is probably too few to cover large fields. Oh, I would love to. Those are probably the languages that we would start with once we start extending categorization. It is not for a lack of desire. It's a lack two things. First, a lack of ability and a lack of time.